a New Kingdom group writing orthography, and it's in a late Ramesside hand that shows some similarities to that of the scribe Inanna, which may be potentially interesting, although not so much to assume that it was written by him. And the dates of the text based on paleography are somewhere between the reigns of Merneptah and Ramses III. There is one Egyptian title accompanying the Kehek text on fragment recto D, column X+4, line 2, and it's highlighted here in red. This title reads, Er en hefa'u amjeden Kehek, a spell for snakes in the speech of the Kehek. From this, it is clear that the text records the Kehek language. But to understand what the Kehek language was linguistically, we must first look towards understanding who the Kehek were historically. Attestations of the Kehek appear relatively plentiful during the Ramesside period and reflect a narrative of the people's history that is much in keeping with the fates of many foreign groups in Egypt. It appears that the Kehek were first taken captive during the Libyan War of Merneptah, and then subsequently appeared as mercenary auxiliaries in the Egyptian army, aiding the Egyptian army in the satirical Papyrus Anastasi I. They parallel the Sherden, a sea people, in Papyrus Harris I, attesting their status as resettled captives under the employment of the Ramesside state during the reign of Ramses III. Gardiner addresses the Kehek when he thinks that they were Libyans. Ever since Gardiner, many others have tried to address the Kehek and have suggested maybe that they're sea peoples. Colleen Manasseh, however, has convincingly demonstrated that they're Libyans in her text, in her work on the Libyan War, where they're almost always associated in textual attestations with either the Meshwesh or the Libu, who are both Libyan groups, and never really alone with the sea peoples. Perhaps of more relevance to my work on this papyrus is an attestation of one Kehek word preserved in another Ramesside magical text also from the Turin collection, Papyrus Turin CGT 540-51. And this word I will address in a little bit. And also the attestation of the Kehek among other Libyan groups in the onomasticon of Amenemope, which gives more credence to a Libyan identification of the Kehek. So if we're pretty certain that the Kehek are Libyans, this brings to question, what did ancient Libyans speak? So more recent Egyptological inquiries into the language of the Libyans, particularly that of Frédéric Collin, have demonstrated that the language of the so-called Libyans who interacted with Egypt mainly during the first millennium BCE is potentially related to this inscriptional language attested in what is now Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco called Numidian, which appears indigenously during the later half of the first millennium BCE, either in Tunisia or maybe in Morocco. Berberists are still not really sure. The Berberists who have been working on the decipherment of Numidian for the better half of the last 2 centuries have continuously suggested that Numidian and Old Libyan, as preserved in Egyptian records, constitute their own sub-branch of the Berber language family, itself a sister family to Egyptian and Semitic within Afroasiatic. So it's a logical supposition then to assume that Kehek, if it belongs to an Old Libyan language family alongside Numidian and the other ancient Libyco-Berber languages, will have approximately as great of a degree of linguistic commonality with modern Berber as these other ancient Libyan languages. And for those of you who are more unfamiliar with Afroasiatic linguistics, it's interesting to note that Berber or Libyco-Berber languages, as we saw in the last talk a little bit, were quite closely related to both Egyptian and Semitic languages. And while they're severely understudied, future research into grammatical and lexical kinship among these branches could be quite fruitful. And of course, this language tree is very reductive of a much more diverse spectrum of related languages. Comparison between Kehek, as it's preserved in this text, and Proto-Berber, if we can speak of it, is quite difficult, as the status of Proto-Berber remains debated among linguists, and it must be reconstructed through the comparative method drawn from the study of over 25 living Berber languages, indigenous to most of the rest of North Africa, including the Siwa Oasis in Egypt, and the ancient and medieval inscriptional material, and the exploration of linguistic identities of ancient Libyan groups, particularly through the lens of Berber linguistics and philology, is part of my ongoing dissertation research. So returning to the say about Kehek, given all of these limitations. So So given the limitations imposed by the text orthography and our understanding of early phases of Berber, in Egyptian as k, may belie several possible Proto-Berber phonemes, and it's really difficult to identify which one this grapheme is recording. It could be k, g, g, or a g. And these are all also, not all of them, but a lot of them are attested in Semitic loanwords. Say about Kahek, given all of these limitations. So given the limitations imposed by the text orthography and our understanding, something because we know that this is a spell for snakes. So it's accompanied by an Egyptian title, and this title is also useful in light of that other papyrus that attests one Kahek word. It's given here as wachaharma, and this word is explicitly defined in the other magical text as hefau, snake, serpent, or worm. And so because we know that wachaharma means snake, and we see this word, charmati, on the left, repeated about 15 times in our papyrus, which we know is a magical spell for the protection against snakes, and we see that charmati includes potentially a similar triliteral root, which are quite common in Berber, to wachaharma, we can conclude that the root cheram might have something to do with snakes. And upon further analysis of this, in light of Marwan Kalani's recent publication, which shows that the cha sign can be read as a z in Semitic language loanwords, we see that the root zeram is likely attested here. Zeram is attested in all of northern Berber with the meaning of snake, serpent, or worm, or eel, or a bunch of other reptiles, but most commonly snake. If you're wondering, these additional affixes can be explained through Berber grammar. The wa prefix is a Berber article, the, for the masculine, and the t suffix is likely a Berber feminine suffix attested entirely in every Berber language, or potentially the d sound, which is a deictic, meaning this, so this snake. Following this, I was able to identify, because there's no uvular, velar, or pharyngeal fricatives, and it's a quite long text, so we would expect those. Second of all, we see that it shows strong affinities on a morphological and lexical level with Berber languages, and the Libyan origin of the Kahek further strengthens the likelihood of an identification of the Kahek language with some ancient branch of the Berber family. And so this brings into question some interesting implications. Indigenous Libyan religion is not well understood archaeologically or textually, largely owing to the inability to dig in the modern nation state of Libya in recent years, and also the lack of indigenous texts. But the little that is known seems to suggest that snakes were of some religious importance to Libyans, attested by serpentine iconography and statuary and ritual objects from the Greco-Roman period, as well as a very interesting gigantic snake carved in the Libyan cave sanctuary at Slonta near Benghazi, shown on the right. Furthermore, for Berberists, this text marks a very interesting discovery, as it likely pushes back our earliest date of a Berber language. The current record is held by the Numidian Punic bilingual dedication inscription of King Mekipsa or Mekiusan in Numidian from either 138 BC or 146 BC, depending on whose chronology you follow, found at Duga in Tunisia. This inscription from Morocco, from the site of Azib Nikis in Adrar Niagur, may potentially be older, though we don't really know. Regardless, they're both late first millennium, and if this text dates to the reign of Merneptah or Ramses III, it's nearly 1,000 years earlier. Thank you. Before